You are listening to the Billy D's podcast.
After renewed interest in lunar exploration following the Artemis mission in April 2026, along with a fresh wave of conspiracy theories, we decided to revisit an encore presentation of Common Sense Reasons Why the Moon Landing Was Not a Hoax, originally released on October 26, 2025.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Billy D's podcast. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. This episode will be a commentary. You can find the Billy D's podcast on your favorite podcasting platform. This particular episode is available only on the major podcasting platforms. And by the way, you can subscribe on those with no paywalls. So do check us out. We might play clips on social media, every once in a while, but this episode in its entirety will be available exclusively on all the major podcast platforms. There won't be video versions and other things. This is the place to check out the Billy D's podcast. What we are going to talk about today has to do with the doubters, the conspiracy theorists who question the moon landing. And, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 5 or 10 years ago, if you were in an argument with someone, you might say, you know what, arguing with you is like trying to argue with someone who doesn't believe we went to the moon or doesn't believe that the earth is round. If you don't know it by now, there's nothing I am going to say that is going to change your mind. It was almost a snarky type of thing to say. Now, for some reason, it has become cool. Many relatively established and respected media figures have chimed in on this. It is a big topic on social media. Now, even socially, I'm running into more and more people who express skepticism that the moon landing actually happened. Now, as I alluded to in my little snarky statement, if you really and truly believe that the moon landing did not happen, there's nothing I am going to say in this podcast that is going to change your mind. But what I am trying to do today is speak to the many people who live in the real common sense world, who are constantly exposed to this silliness. And if you're tired of trying to come up with ways to counter it, to talk against it, I'm going to try to give you some practical things that you may want to consider. It's not necessarily heavy scientific stuff that I'm going to talk about here, but it's just some practical things that you may want to consider when you get into a situation where this is being discussed. All right, in my opinion, a lot of this speculation, a lot of this wonderment around the moon landings really have to do with what was legitimately back in the late 60s, 1970s. It was a very impressive feat. It was something that obviously deserved a lot of respect from the scientific and engineering community. But the media really picked that ball up and ran with it. It made its way into science fiction, which, affected a generation of people. And this idea that the moon landing was something so incredibly it was so incredible in terms of its achievement that there was almost something supernatural about it. It was the pinnacle of human achievement. And we just ran with that. And it became something that kind of has the same lore that the pyramids do. Now, if you are a regular listener of this podcast, you know that I have said that the pyramids are overrated. And before you get in, did I hear that right? Did Billy really say that the pyramids are overrated? Yes, they are. They are overrated. The idea that aliens had to be involved, the idea that there's this ancient technology that we lost and no longer exists that built the pyramid, that is a bunch of bullshit that is stacked almost as high as the pyramids themselves. All right. I could go a lot through that. Just for example, there's a lot of pyramids around Egypt that weren't finished because the dimensions were wrong. You got to keep in mind that pyramid building went on for about 1,000 years, from about 2700 to 1700 BC. And when you have a workforce that's in the thousands for a period of time that's 1,000 years, you're bound to get something done. Okay, you're bound to get something done. And the pyramids do not support really any usable space inside them. There's hidden passageways and all these other things. But for the most part, you can't go into one of these pyramids and play the Super Bowl. Okay, it's basically stones laying on top of stones. It's a big stack of stones, neatly stacked stones. And I understand they're huge. I understand they're impressive, but that's basically what they are. And the rest of the stuff that they've come up with is used to propel movies, propel documentaries, propel books, propel tourism around the wonderment of these things. For example, how did they get them level? Well, it's really easy. They used the basement structure. They used water to get the bases level. Another one I always hear about is 3.14 pi. How does it keep coming up? Yes, it is true that the Egyptians probably did not know about pi as a mathematical constant, but they used practical and circular methods that naturally produce the radio. So if you're using a round measuring tool, if you're using a round stone or circular layout process, it is very plausible and would explain why pi shows up. It is not mystical. It is just practical geometry. Another one I always get is, well, there's pyramids all over the world. Somebody had to be guiding. Yes, there are. But, a pyramid is very much like a cube. It's very much like a sphere. It is a geometric shape that pretty much invents itself. Now, if you're using stones, you can't really construct a sphere too well. If you're using stones, you could construct a cube, but you got to keep in mind that as you go up, the weight along the perimeter of that cube is much greater. Over time, the edges probably would start to crumble. With a pyramid, the higher you go, the smaller the shape gets. So each layer is smaller than the one below it and bigger than the one above it. It lends itself to lasting a very long time, especially when you consider it's not something you can go and walk around in. You can't go in there and hold an event. As a matter of fact, one of the structures that really does kind of impress me is the Pantheon Dome in Rome, which is not as old. It's probably was built around AD 125. And it is the best preserved ancient Roman monument, and it is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome globally. Now, I might be just a little nervous walking in there, but you know what? It's a usable space. And I'll give the Romans one thing. They sure knew how to work with cement because most people I know can't fix their front step in a way that lasts a year. And somehow or other, the concrete in Rome was just absolutely amazing. So and here again, I could go on about this. You get my point. There's a certain wonderment around the pyramids that goes beyond really what they were. They were incredible marvels of the ancient world. I'm not saying that they're not, but they're nothing that we have to delve into the supernatural to understand. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the people that really promote these ideas about the supernatural and all this other kind of stuff around the pyramids are the very people, if you gave them a book laying out exactly what we know and what construction methods we know were used, they would find that boring. And I kind of believe that, that there's something to be said for that. There's a certain thing that we as people find entertaining when it comes to wonderment. This is why the legends of Bigfoot and Loch Ness and all these other things still persist, because everybody wants to be a part of something that would be so amazing to be around if it actually occurred. And of course, when it comes to the pyramids, there's a lot of really good, solid evidence there that makes it by itself, without getting into all that stuff, that makes it fascinating, but it just doesn't grab the appeal of aliens. It doesn't grab the appeal of a lost civilization that had all this science that we just don't understand. All right. Now, again, my point here is that the pyramids for the ancient world were truly impressive. So impressive, in fact, that it's real easy to slide into this thing. Well, there must be something supernatural about them. And in many ways, we're dealing with the same thing with the moon landing, because if you go back to the 1960s, the 1970s, for that technology to have been developed as quickly as it was, we're talking microprocessors and all these other kind of amazing things that have benefited us to this day. It's so impressive and such a wonderment of work engineering that it's really easy to slide into this thing that, well, it's so impressive that it must have been faked. And I want to be clear here. Just as I say the pyramids are overrated, that's not to take away from the scientific point of view. The archaeological evidence is all very impressive. But it's not so impressive that we need to go to aliens helping us. And the same thing applies to the moonshot. It is extremely impressive, but it's not so unbelievable that we should jump to theories of a hoax. Let's start in terms of our practical analysis of how we can start to break this down. How did we get this out of control with the idea of going to the moon? Let's start with the idea that prior to what started in the 1950s and the 1960s, the space program, the idea that we didn't know anything about outer space, that we didn't know anything about how the planets worked, or that we didn't know anything about that stuff prior to that is simply not true. As a matter of fact, it was stated by NASA during that incredible time of Apollo that we stood on the shoulders of giants to get here. And this goes back centuries. I know a lot of people don't like to hear about Albert Einstein or Sir Isaac Newton because they feel it's boring, it's too much science, they don't understand it. And when you do that, you are denying yourself not only an education, but you are denying yourself what I would call really good entertainment. These people were fascinating individuals. Even if you just delve into the history of these people, the people that they were, especially for the time that they existed in, and they were able to come up with these ideas. It's a fascinating story. Isaac Newton, for example, I'm going to tell you some things you probably didn't learn in the 7th grade about Isaac Newton. He was deeply religious. He was an obsessive theologian. He was very much interested in the chronology of biblical events. End of times prophecy, but maybe not in the way that you've heard about in common speak. He wasn't a doomsday person. He believed that Scripture encoded a divine plan for history and the future, one that could be uncovered with careful mathematical and linguistic study. He's been quoted as saying that the end of times date would be around the year 2060. And what he was really getting at was this wasn't necessarily a doomsday prophecy, but rather he was saying not before 2060 as a theological argument against overzealous prophets. And we've had plenty of doomsday people out there, and he was guarding against that. Okay. His intent was that Newton saw prophecy not as superstition, but as a divine system of knowledge. Just like gravity or motion, he believed that God's universe was lawful and mathematically ordered, whether in nature or in Scripture. So in his mind, predicting historical outcomes wasn't magic. It was uncovering divine order. Now, even if you want to dismiss these things because they don't align with your own beliefs, I mean, that would be frustrating to me because that's not where I'm trying to go with this. Where I'm trying to go with this is that these people are fascinating individuals. And if you're like me, they're part of how history has unfolded. And it is so fascinating to hear about them and what motivated them. It's just amazing. But in the end, we don't remember Isaac Newton for what he believed. We remember him for what he was able to prove. And I got to tell you, calculus still works. And a lot of the formulas that he came up with still work, even with our best computers. Things like escape velocity, which is the speed and angle toward the horizon that you have to attain to go into orbit. Now, he wasn't able to assign a numeric value to that, but he developed the theory behind it, which involves universal gravitation and orbital motion. A lot of the things that we drastically needed to know, like what a person would weigh standing on the moon, his law allows it to be calculated once the moon's mass and radius are known. And by the way, a person who weighs about 180 pounds on Earth would weigh about 29.8 pounds on the moon, roughly 1/6 their weight. So once you start to strip away the wonderment of going into space and start breaking it down into simple components, it's really not that, quote unquote, unbelievable that we were able to go to the moon. Okay, there was some rocket technology that needed to be developed. Certainly life support systems, which here again, that started years before the actual shot to the moon, before that planning started. And some other things, involving the guidance systems. When you start breaking these things down, each individual thing isn't that incredible. I'm not saying it's not impressive from an engineering standpoint or from a knowledge standpoint, but it's not like it's this supernatural thing that you have to bend your mind to believe. It's really not. That information is out there if you want to go there. And this idea that it was lost, that's another one. The technology sense in the last 50 years with space travel, aerodynamics, fuel, all these other things, computer technology, these things over the last 50 years have progressed so much. If I told you, let's build a ship exactly like the Mayflower, let's build a wooden ship and find somebody who can navigate the ocean using nothing but the stars and sails. Even after adjusting for dollars, it would be incredibly expensive. And rekindling those skills would be almost impossible. That doesn't necessarily mean that we don't know how it was done. Okay? And, even when it comes to things like the Wright brothers airplane, there's a lot of people who have speculated about, was that design the best one? And they've tried to rebuild them. Well, the fact of the matter is you can't hide what you have learned over the past 100 years. Knowing what we know about aerodynamics now, we can make anything fly almost. The oddest shapes. And to pretend that we are going to build the Wright brothers airplane in exactly the way it was with that knowledge that was available, it's simply impossible. There's materials, there's knowledge now that was not available to them. So it's very hard to go back and prove that that airplane was or was not the definitive design of the time. And the exact same thing is happening with the technology of the Apollo program. It is just simply not practical to revisit that technology and try to use it again. That's the explanation I have for that. But anyway, let's move on. There's two areas that I'm going to present to you as from a practical common sense standpoint, why you can be very confident that the moon landing did in fact happen. And the first one is going to be the other countries that were able to monitor that flight. And the second is going to be the evidence that is left on the moon. Okay, let's start with being able to monitor that flight. Let's start with the United States. And I know we can't count the United States because they were a part of the conspiracy, right? Okay, fine. But nonetheless, there were a lot of people involved that would have had to be lying. NASA's Worldwide Tracking Network is a group that had in Goldstone, California, Honeysuckle Creek, and in Australia, parks in Australia, Madrid, Spain, Guam, Hawaii, and other locations. The U.S. had a full handle on the telemetry, the voice, and the video data. Now, what I just rattled off there involves a lot of people. And the idea that they were all involved in a conspiracy and have kept their mouth shut over the last 50 years is pretty far-reaching. But let's not stop there. Let's go to the Soviet Union at the time. The Soviets tracked Apollo missions using their deep space monitoring facilities, such as in Crimea and the Far East, and spy ships stationed around the world. They could confirm the spacecraft's trajectory and lunar orbit, and publicly congratulated NASA after confirming the success. Now, I got to tell you, if you're familiar with the history of that time, what was the USSR at the time, if they had any inkling that the United States was getting away with a hoax, they would have said something. All right. The United Kingdom, Britain's Jodrell Bank Observatory, independently tracked Apollo 11 signals and the Soviet lunar missions at the same time. Astronomer Sir Bernard Lovell publicly verified that the Apollo transmissions were genuinely coming from the moon's vicinity. Now, it doesn't stop there. Australia, Honeysuckle Creek and Parkes radio telescopes were part of NASA's network, but were also operated by Australians who directly received the live TV broadcast of Neil Armstrong's first steps. Their equipment also confirmed the authenticity of the signal source. But it doesn't stop there. Spain. The Madrid Deep Space Communication Complex, which was a part of NASA's network, was operated by Spanish engineers and confirmed the telemetry independently. Now, here again, I've often said this applies to anything. If you're going to apply a conspiracy theory, one of the things that you have to consider is how many people knew about it. The idea that a lot of people knew about this from a lot of different countries, from all over the world, they all had, of the time, the most sophisticated scientific instruments, and nobody found an issue. Nobody found a hiccup in what was being presented as the moon landing. Now, a lot of people being involved, there's the theory, and I totally agree with it. The more people that have to be involved with a conspiracy, the more unlikely it is to be true. Typically, things get pulled off. If you're going to any detective will tell you, if you're going to pull off a crime, the number one rule doesn't have anything to do with DNA. It doesn't have anything to do with how to avoid surveillance cameras. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. What it has to do with is keeping your mouth shut. All right? And there's too many people involved in this around the world that would have had to keep their mouth shut. And in particular, with what happened with the USSR, there's nothing motivating them to say that this was legit other than the facts. They would have loved to humiliate the United States. It would have been at the top of their list. But let's move on to my second point, and that is the surface of the moon today. I've actually had some people tell me that robots were sent to the moon. We really didn't send people. If you consider the technology of the time, okay, it is more plausible that we actually sent people to the moon than robotics. If you consider that, the technology of the time, these finely tuned robotics that would have had to account of a control delay going to the moon and all these other things, that technology existed in a plentiful amount during the 1960s, that's even more ridiculous, actually, in my opinion. But that's neither here nor there. There's a number of countries that have photographed areas of the moon. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which was the LRO, now this is United States, launched 2009. Now, of course, this is the United States. This is, but this is a different generation of people now, okay? The LRO has taken extremely high-resolution images, okay? You can clearly see the Apollo lunar modules, rover tracks, experiment packages, and even astronaut footpaths. NASA has released these images publicly for all 6 Apollo landing sites, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. And again, I've had people say that these footprints were placed by robots, which would have been truly extraordinary in terms of the technology, the control devices, the robotics, and everything else that was available during that time period. But the United States isn't the only country that has found these things. Japan, 2007, mapped the entire moon with high precision. Its terrain camera and laser altimeter helped identify topographic consistency at the Apollo 15 site. Its resolution wasn't strong enough to get down and actually see hardware, but it verified surface landmarks and shadows, all of which matched the Apollo photos. China, our good friend China, launched 2010, captured images of Apollo 15 and 17 sites. While not detailed enough to actually see equipment, the images confirmed the correct surface features, again, at the known landing coordinates. Chinese scientists publicly confirmed that the sites were consistent with U.S. mission data. India, 2008, provided imaging and spectral data of Apollo sites using their terrain mapping camera and moon mineralogy mapper. It helped identify surface composition changes near the Apollo 16 site, consistent with lunar module exhaust and disturbance. The European Space Agency, now their confirmation is indirect but valid nonetheless. It has not sent its own orbiter specifically targeting Apollo sites, but cooperated with NASA's LRO mission. The scientists have independently analyzed that data and confirmed the presence and positions of Apollo artifacts. Now, here is where I am going to get really crazy, because what was left behind gets really, really interesting. First of all, from a scientific interesting standpoint, we left behind reflectors, which are used to this day to monitor how the moon is moving, okay, in a very precision way. And we have determined that the moon is actually slowly, very slowly, moving away from the Earth. Now, it's like I said, this is a slow progression, but those reflectors were put there by someone or something, right? Well, here I'm going to get into some stuff that was left behind that was not put there by a robot. Across all 6 Apollo landing missions, again, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17, astronauts left behind 96 bags of human waste, including urine, feces, vomit, and used wipes. Yeah, that's a nice little gift to leave behind. I got to tell you, I'm not very regular to begin with when I go on a trip, and I can't imagine being as far as possible that any human being has ever traveled away from the origins of life on Earth in what amounts to a tin can. I can't imagine sitting there taking a dump. I would come back from that mission, constipated as hell. Okay? But these guys left 96 bags of human waste. These were stored and sealed in waste bags and containers and jettisoned to save weight for the liftoff from the moon. The astronauts also left food wrappers, sample containers, tools, boots, cameras, and even a few urine collection devices. Now, some of you may ask, and when I first found out about this, I wondered the same thing myself. Why did they leave that stuff behind? Was it really that hard to take it with you like you would in a camper? Well, actually it was. Every little piece of weight mattered for the lunar ascent, which simply means getting the lunar module back up into space. So they also wanted to make room for other things, since they only had so much weight that they could deal with. They brought back rock samples, for example. So they discarded low-priority mass, including waste and used equipment. So in effect, moon dirt came to Earth and human waste stayed on the moon. Now, this is actually of scientific interest because in recent years, scientists have expressed interest in revisiting the waste that was left behind. And yes, this is serious. This is something that they're genuinely interested in because the waste that's up there contains microbes from Earth from 1969 to 1972. And studying them after 50 years in the harsh lunar environment could reveal how long life can survive in space conditions, such as exposure to radiation, the vacuum, and temperature extremes, and so on. Now, no one has gone back yet to study these samples, but they're still up there, frozen, sterilized by radiation, and likely still recognizable. So just imagine at some future point, and it may not be that far off because there's moonshots being actively planned right now. Imagine being the new crew member on some future mission to the moon, and guess what you're going to be assigned to do? Yeah, talk about a shit job, right? Well, that should be interesting. But anyway, these are all things that you can consider the next time somebody brings up the idea that the moon landing was faked. I'm Billy Dees. Hey, I'll tell you what. Do you have an opinion about this? Well, I'll tell you what, you can find me real easily on social media. And I got to say, the old Twitter X is still my sort of social media home. And you can find me there at Billy Dees. And if you have an opinion or an idea or maybe something I didn't consider as to what should be obvious as to why the moon landing really did happen, or even if you believe it didn't happen, hey, as long as you're respectful, you're welcome to tweet me or post me or whatever they call it now on X anytime you wish. All right, don't forget, please subscribe to the Billy Dees podcast wherever you are hearing this because it comes with no paywalls. We do not charge listeners for the Billy Dees podcast. We appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Billy Dees, and we will talk again very, very soon. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.